It's great to be back in Seattle. One quick interesting story before we start. I was here in 2010, back when they had Casual Connect in Seattle for a number of years. Same old parties, good shows, really interesting, great event. And we had the party at the aquarium, which I believe it is again tomorrow night. They had a poker tournament, and I was fortunate enough to make it to the final table, sitting next to a guy. We introduce ourselves, start talking, gives me his business card, says Caesars Interactive. I said, great, I'm never going to win this poker tournament now, but I was like, what is Caesars doing here? And then obviously, lo and behold, Caesars acquired Playtika and then ended up selling them for this record transaction last year. But it just goes to show that this event is great for meeting people. You never know what can happen. Really good business development. So it's a pleasure to support this association and do these presentations. I'll save you guys on the introduction. So market overview, social casino, I think most people in this room know what it is. Free-to-play slots, table games, and poker and bingo, which you can access on your mobile device or desktop computer. It's all free-to-play, the freemium model. In terms of market size, it hit $3.8 billion last year in 2016. It will eclipse $4.2 billion in 2017. You can see this very nice 30% calendarized growth rate over the last 5 years. The two shadings here is the mobile revenues versus desktop, and obviously what you've seen is all the growth really has come from the mobile channel. You're now looking at about 75% of the industry revenues being generated via mobile. Part of the key macro drivers that have helped driven this industry, proliferation of social networks, the growing acceptance of the freemium model, and obviously a massive install base of smartphones and tablets. So when we talk about social casino, I said it's slots, poker, bingo, and table games, but the reality is slots really dominates this industry. It's about 79% of all revenues. In 2Q, that ratio has remained fairly constant, so it's heavily driven by free-to-play slot games. Bingo accounts for about 7%, poker 13%, and then table games is actually less than 1%. It's a very nascent categories. In terms of the leading titles and publishers, you'll see Playtika is pretty dominant, category leader in two and very close in poker, but you have Slotomania is the largest social slot game. Zynga Poker is still the largest poker game by revenues worldwide. Bingo Blitz from Playtika is the largest social bingo game, and there's no real dominant player in table games. Key geographies, similar story here. It is a global market, but the reality is North America accounts for an overwhelming amount of the revenue, 74%. That's followed by Asia Pacific at 17%, Western Europe around 7%. And you see 13 of the top 15 companies generate the majority of their revenues from the U.S. I've listed some of the category, the leading publishers in the different geographies. Again, you see Playtika pretty dominant across the board there. Where you start to see some mixture is in regions like China. You have Tencent, Boya, Poker City, who are the leading publishers there. You begin to see some deviations in areas like Brazil and Germany. But again, North America, the big market, and Australia. And one of the reasons why, again, you see such dominance for this category in these markets is because you have a very large, educated, built-in slot base. And so these markets are where real money slots, gambling is very popular. And as you saw in the prior slide, social slots dominates this industry, so there's no coincidence that you then see the majority of the industry revenues being driven by these geographies. The top 10 titles, this is as of 2Q17. This includes both Facebook and mobile revenues. Slotomania now doing around $122 million a quarter, so nearly $500 million a year this game is now generating. 2x its closest competitor there, Double Down, and the list goes on. Again, these should be pretty familiar titles if you're on the App Store, especially in the U.S. all these titles here are typically in the top 50 grossing and pretty impressive revenue numbers. Competitive landscape might be a little difficult to see here. This is a chart from one of our reports. We track every quarter the market share trends among the top 15 players. And again, you see some pretty familiar names. Playtika, again, far and away category leader with 26% market share. The number 2 player now is W Games. That name might not sound familiar, but they recently acquired Double Down. So combined, those two companies have just around 10%. Just behind them is Scientific Games with Jackpot Party Casino and a number of other apps that have been growing and taking market share. You also have Zynga with Zynga Poker and their various slot titles. Aristocrat, which owns Product Madness with Heart of Vegas and now Cashman Casino. Churchill Downs, which owns Big Fish. They've got Big Fish Games and Jackpot City Slots, and the list goes on. What's interesting here is obviously it's pretty top heavy. Top 3 companies account for 44% of the social casino market. Top 15 account for 86%. So it's a pretty top heavy industry, and we've seen a lot of consolidation in M&A, and so that is not going to change anytime soon. Categorizing some of the key players. Again, this is a little subjective, but how we're looking at it is you kind of have your early movers. That was the Playtika, Big Fish, Double Downs of the world who really entered this space early, were able to acquire customers, users at very, very attractive market rates. You had the big wave of gaming equipment suppliers come in and be pretty aggressive on the M&A side. WMS, which is now owned by Scientific Games, Aristocrat, which acquired Product Madness, IGT, which obviously acquired Double Down and consequently sold it. You have social gaming companies like Zynga, GSN, Asia-focused companies, Tencent, Boya, and then some new incumbents that have been quite impressive and broken, like Merca and Huge Games. So it's a pretty comprehensive list in terms of strategies from these companies. Some of the key themes here we've called out. Again, the early movers, acquiring cohorts at very attractive rates. The gaming equipment suppliers leveraging the land-based content. Social gaming companies using some of their social DNA and then acquiring land-based talent. The Asia focus, focusing on some of these untapped larger markets. And then the new incumbents are typically what you're seeing is being disruptive through innovation or awards or highly social or engaging elements. In terms of gaming suppliers, just to dig a little bit deeper with them, we've kind of seen 3 primary strategies from them. M&A, strategic partnerships, and licensing. As I said, on the M&A side, you see all the big suppliers essentially acquired their way into this sector. Scientific Games, Aristocrat, IGT formerly, and AGS. So that has been kind of the most popular strategy for them to get exposure is via direct M&A and then leveraging their land-based content and using that in a social environment. You've also had strategic partnerships from a few companies like Konami has partnered with Play Studios. They have My Konami Slots, which has done really well. And you're starting to see, and you also seen a few licensing from some of the other suppliers like Every, Aruze, and now obviously IGT is getting a royalty and license with W Games. Casino operator strategies, somewhat similar. You've had M&A, B2B white label, and then internally developed. So on the M&A side, there hasn't been as much, deal flow as you've seen with the gaming equipment suppliers, but you have seen some. Certainly, MGM has a minority investment in Play Studios. Penn National Gaming acquired Rocket Games last year, and Delaware North also acquired social casino assets. B2B white label has been much more popular with regional and kind of individual standalone properties. So Foxwoods, Mohegan Sun, WinStar, these are all properties that have licensed, worked with a social casino platform provider like Scientific Games, Game Account Network to provide an offering. And then internally developed, I would say this is kind of the newest trend here. You've had companies like Rush Street and Paula building a platform internally to offer social casino games. One of the big key trends happening in the industry is on the user acquisition side. Again, this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone who lives and breathes this industry, but it's becoming much more expensive to do paid marketing and acquire installs. This data here is from our friends at Bidalgo. They shared they're very involved in social casino. And they kind of indexed cost per install for a number of quarters for us on both iOS and Android. The caveat being here, obviously, this is not a perfect estimate. It does vary based on the maturity of the game, the geography that you're marketing and targeting. But generally speaking, you're seeing a CPI inflation across the board, which reflects increased competition in an environment where we're starting to see a ceiling for the addressable user base, the DAUs. We're not seeing a ton of growth in daily active users in key markets like North America. Most of the revenue growth that you're seeing these days is driven by the monetization side. So with inflating CPIs, flattish DAUs, that is not the best case scenario for publishers. But on the flip side, you now have a very big market for the mobile advertising side. This is a number we haven't put out before, but we estimate this year, 2017, just in social casino, they will spend over $1 billion on marketing. That's mostly UA. As Jeet said earlier, and as most people know, a majority of that goes to Facebook and Google, kind of polling companies and clients that we work with. We get to a number around 80%, so $800 million a year, just from social casino UA going to Facebook and Google. That still leaves another $200 million for the likes of all these other mobile marketing networks, AppLovin, Vungle, AdColony. You see a lot of them here. Throw great parties and sponsors, and this is part of the reason why it's a very strong market for them, and social casino is a very important category. Another big theme topic in this industry has been M&A. We've tried to highlight the notable deals over the past 5 years. On the bottom there being Caesars' initial acquisition of Playtika in 2011. 2012, you saw a number of deals from the gaming equipment suppliers, IGT acquiring Double Down, WMS acquiring Phantom, Aristocrat acquiring Product Madness. 2013, you saw Caesars acquire Buffalo, Zynga acquire Spooky Cool, and the list goes on. Needless to say, there's been a ton of consolidation, which is why you have a relatively top-heavy industry. The more notable transactions has been obviously W Games' acquisition of Double Down, and Caesars' divestiture of Playtika to a Chinese consortium named Giant. So in terms of numbers, you're looking at worth nearly $8 billion worth of M&A transactions over the past 4 years. About half of that is from the big the Playtika sale, and then you've had some big deals like Double Down for $825 million. Big Fish was around $800 million. Again, a lot of consolidation, and frankly, we still see we still predict more deal flow in the future. So some of the factors that impact valuation, there shouldn't be a surprise here, but some of the key things that companies consider and look at: revenue growth, scale, the talent, the platform, mobile and web revenue mix. Geographic revenue concentration, your portfolio, your core games, as well as your pipeline, and then the KPIs, DAUs, monetization rents, retention, very important, and paying player conversion rates, very important as well. And that's really it. So thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions on social casino.
Adam, quick question. I noticed the U.S. being the majority of the revenue for social gaming. Any analysis on if real money internet gaming federally was approved, what kind of impact would be? Or looking at New Jersey, having a full casino internet gaming, what impact that might have had in social gaming in that state?
Yeah, so we've done some research and surveys about the overlap between social casino players and real money. What you find is about 2/3 of all social slot players visit a casino at least once a year. And for paying players in social casino, that number is even higher. So there's a very high overlap among social slot, social casino players who also visit and gamble online. In terms of kind of cannibalization and what impact that would happen, it's obviously difficult to say. There's not much data, and it's hard to just even isolate New Jersey. From my discussions with clients and people in the industry, most people do not believe you're seeing any type of cannibalization. It is a separate industry. The reasons for playing, even though there's a high overlap, the reasons for playing social casino, differ versus typically, the gambling mentality. But certainly that is, a risk factor that companies consider, longer term. But again, our personal view, not necessarily supported by data yet, is that these two industries are actually complementary, that they help, they can kind of help grow each other.
Hi, Luke Delaney from the ISGA. Do you see any regulatory risk for social where it's pushing boundaries in some of the more regulated markets?
Yep, good question. So that's kind of another risk factor you would see on, highlighted, certainly in any type of transaction or due diligence. So will social casino ever become regulated? I think our personal view is certainly not the traditional B2C model where most of the revenues are being generated. What Playdiga's doing, what Double Down, Big Fish, it's the same model, mechanics that you see across the mobile gaming spectrum. Obviously, it is, imitating, a virtual casino or slot machine, but that said, it does not constitute gambling. Where it gets a little trickier is obviously when companies start to implement these reward programs, a sweepstakes model, there's some debates around certain states and areas where that may or may not be legal, and then the casino operators offering a social platform, tying it into their VIP reward programs and whatnot, their loyalty programs. So then you're starting to be able to redeem points and things of that nature. So there is, some general risk for the most part. I would say this industry has done a pretty good job of kind of trying to stay in front, educate the appropriate lawmakers. Obviously, the ISGA plays an important role in that aspect, and I don't see any immediate threats. Certainly, we always get questions like, look what happened to the daily fantasy sports industry. I don't think that's a good analogy here. But certainly something that the bigger players are mindful of and do think about, and they have to, because this is now such a big and important industry for them.
Hi, Warren from App Holdings. I was wondering on the M&A side, what kind of valuations are you seeing as like a multiple of EBITDA or revenues?
Yeah, they've historically been kind of in the 5 to 8 times EBITDA range. More recently, with some of these Asian buyers coming in, you've seen multiples double digits, 10 plus times. I believe Playdiga was sold at around 13 times, and Double Down was sold at around 10.5 times trailing. So there has been, the multiples have gone up recently, and on a revenue basis, it usually works out to around 2 to 4 times revenues.
Hi, you were talking about how there's crossover between online gambling and social gaming, social casino gaming specifically. Do you see interest from the online gambling software providers moving into this space, like the land-based operators obviously moved into this space? Do you see online gambling software providers moving in this space as well?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I assume you're referring to some of the European providers, Playdeck, bwin, GVC. I was always a little surprised that they weren't more aggressive in this industry. And I think, a number of years ago, a lot had them kind of listed as a potential player. They certainly, on a few levels, I believe bwin at some point had a kind of social casino platform, and there's been others, but no real success stories. So I don't know the answer to why that is the case. It remains to be seen, because I do agree. I think there's some synergies there, and it does make strategic sense on a number of levels. And as most people know, Playdica and in Israel, a lot of kind of that DNA and blood was built from kind of RMG, people and background, really understanding the user acquisition side. So at this point, they would have to make a pretty sizable acquisition to get involved. I guess we'll see.